7:04 a.m., Persian Gulf, 61 nautical miles northwest of Bahrain. An Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy vessel just fired a warning shot directly across the bow of USNS Rappahannock, and the round hit the water close enough that the impact spray reached the ship's forward deck. Not 200 meters ahead, not a symbolic gesture. 44 meters. The spray was on the deck. The Rappahannock is a Henry J. Kaiser-class underway replenishment oiler, a 677-foot supply vessel carrying 160,000 barrels of marine diesel fuel and aviation gas designated for the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier strike group operating 90 nautical miles to the southeast. It has no offensive weapons. It has a .50 caliber machine gun on the bow and a crew of 23 civilian mariners and 110 Navy personnel. The Iranian fast attack craft that fired on it was a boghammer doing 44 knots on a direct intercept vector with 2 additional contacts closing from the northwest. 3 boats, 1 unarmed supply ship, 61 miles from Bahrain. The crew of the Rappahannock had been awake for 19 hours. The watch officer had been tracking the Iranian contacts for 6 minutes before the shot. He had transmitted 2 bridge-to-bridge warnings. He had notified 5th Fleet. Then the round hit the water at 44 meters, and the decision about what to do next belonged to a commanding officer whose ship cannot fight back. Welcome to Navy Combat USA. This is the morning Iranian forces moved to intercept an American supply vessel in the open Persian Gulf. And the air response that arrived before the situation became something that couldn't be walked back. To understand why a supply vessel was operating alone in the northern Persian Gulf, 61 miles from Bahrain, you need to understand the logistics architecture that keeps a carrier strike group at sea. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group had been on station in the Persian Gulf for 31 days. An aircraft carrier burns through fuel, aviation gas, food, ammunition, and spare parts at a rate that commercial shipping logistics professionals find genuinely staggering. A single carrier air wing, the aircraft, not the ship, consumes approximately 1.5 million pounds of aviation fuel every 4 days of sustained operations. The Henry J. Kaiser-class oiler exists specifically to solve this problem. The Rappahannock carries enough fuel to extend the strike group's operational endurance by approximately 11 days. Its job is to move from Bahrain, where it takes on fuel, to the strike group's operating area, conduct an underway replenishment, and return. The transit from Bahrain to the Eisenhower's position was a 6-hour run across open Gulf waters. Normally, a supply vessel making this run would have an escort, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and company, providing anti-surface and anti-air defense. On the morning of the incident, the Rappahannock had no escort. The destroyer that had been assigned to escort the run, USS Jason Dunham, had been diverted 18 hours earlier to respond to a separate incident in the strait, leaving the Rappahannock with authorization to proceed unescorted because the threat assessment for the transit route was rated as low. The threat assessment had not been updated in 11 days. 11 days is a long time in the Persian Gulf. The Iranian contacts had been detected at 6:58 a.m. by the Rappahannock's watchstanders on the bridge radar. 3 contacts emerging from the general direction of the IRGCN's Farsi Island base, moving southeast at speeds between 38 and 44 knots. The watch officer, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Leland, recognized the approach vector immediately. The contacts were not on a course that would take them past the Rappahannock. They were on a course that would intersect it. He transmitted on bridge-to-bridge Channel 16 at 7:01 a.m. Iranian naval vessels on bearing 327. This is USNS Rappahannock, a United States Navy auxiliary vessel operating in international waters. You are on a converging course. Please alter course and maintain a safe distance. No response. He transmitted again at 7:03 a.m. No response. At 7:04 a.m., the lead bog hammer, now at approximately 400 meters from the Rappahannock's port bow, fired a single round from its 12.7 millimeter heavy machine gun. The round impacted the water at 44 meters off the bow. The spray reached the forward deck. Leland was already transmitting the flash report to 5th Fleet when the water was still in the air. The flash report reached 5th Fleet at 7:04 a.m. and 31 seconds. Commander Kelly Ashworth, the same duty officer who had handled the Gravely missile incident weeks earlier, was at the watch station. She read the transmission and looked at the situation board in one motion. The Rappahannock was 61 miles from Bahrain. It had no escort. It had no defensive weapons capable of engaging fast attack craft. It was carrying fuel for a carrier strike group that needed that fuel. She looked at the air asset board. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets from VFA 213 were on Alert 5 at Naval Air Station Bahrain. 5 minutes to wheels up. The math was 61 miles at cruise speed. Approximately 14 minutes to the Rappahannock's position. She ordered the scramble without waiting for flag authorization. She would brief Rear Admiral Keane when the aircraft were already airborne. The aircraft launched at 7:06 a.m. Ashworth briefed Keane at 7:07 a.m. He asked one question. What are the Iranians doing right now? She pulled up the latest contact data from the Rappahannock's flash feed. The 3 Iranian boats had closed to within 200 meters of the supply ship and were circling it at 20 knots. The lead bog hammer had not fired again, but it was circling. A circling pattern is not departure geometry. It is holding geometry. Aboard the Rappahannock, Commanding Officer Commander Patricia Wells had been on the bridge for 4 minutes since the shot. She was managing a situation for which her training had prepared her in general terms and not at all in specific ones. The Rappahannock was not a warship. It could not maneuver to break the Iranian circle the way a destroyer could. At its maximum speed of 20 knots, it was slower than the bog hammers circling it at 20 knots of comfortable cruise. If she accelerated, they would simply match her. She had the .50 caliber gun on the bow. She also had 160,000 barrels of marine diesel fuel and aviation gas aboard. A machine gun fight in the vicinity of an oiler carrying 160,000 barrels of fuel is an extremely bad idea. Wells knew this. She assessed her options the way a commanding officer of a non-combatant vessel is trained to assess them. Communicate, signal, maintain position, request assistance. Do not escalate. Do not provide provocation. She was transmitting on every available frequency. She was documenting every Iranian movement. She was feeding position data to 5th Fleet in real time through her communication suite. And she was watching the 3 Iranian boats circle her ship and waiting for the thing that would tell her whether this was harassment or something worse. At 7:11 a.m., the lead bog hammer broke from its circling pattern and moved to a position directly ahead of the Rappahannock, stopping at approximately 150 meters and turning to present its broadside. Broadside presentation is not a maneuver with an innocent interpretation. It is a blocking position. The 2 FA-18Fs crossed the Rappahannock's position at 7:20 a.m., 14 minutes after launch from NAS Bahrain. They came in low, 200 feet above the water, afterburners lit, crossing the supply ship's position at 500 knots on a bearing that took them directly over the 3 Iranian contacts. The acoustic and visual signature of 2 Super Hornets at 200 feet and 500 knots is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The pressure wave arrives before the sound. The sound arrives before the visual register resolves. It is not threatening in the way that a pointed weapon is threatening. It is threatening in the way that a physical force is threatening. It occupies space, it displaces air, it makes clear that something very large and very fast has decided to be present at this location. The lead bog hammer at 150 meters ahead of the Rappahannock turned north within 8 seconds of the Hornet's first pass. 8 seconds. The other 2 contacts followed within 30 seconds. By 7:23 a.m., All three Iranian vessels were moving northwest at 40 knots toward the Farsi Island operating area. The FA-18Fs established a combat air patrol orbit above the Rappahannock and remained on station for the next 94 minutes, until an escort destroyer, USS Cole, was repositioned to meet the supply ship and provide surface escort for the remainder of the transit to the Eisenhower. The Rappahannock delivered its fuel load on schedule. The Eisenhower's air wing never knew the fuel had almost not arrived. The post-incident review identified the single most significant failure with brutal clarity. The Rappahannock had been authorized to transit unescorted based on an 11-day-old threat assessment. The assessment had been low when it was written. In the 11 days between the assessment and the transit, 2 separate intelligence reports had been generated noting increased IRGCN patrol activity in the northern Gulf corridor. Neither report had triggered a reassessment of the Rappahannock's transit authorization. Not because the reports were missed, they were read. Not because the analysts didn't connect them to the supply ship's scheduled transit. One analyst had noted the potential correlation in a comment appended to the second report. The comment had not been escalated. It had been written, appended, and filed. The analyst who wrote it was a GS-12 civilian working a 12-hour shift who had no authority to change a transit authorization and no established pathway for pushing a corridor-specific threat note up to the operational level fast enough to matter. The institutional gap between the intelligence analysis function and the operational authorization function had been present for years. Every major review of Persian Gulf operations since 2010 had noted it in some form. Recommendations had been made. Process improvements had been proposed. The gap was still there at 7:04 a.m. when a round hit the water 44 meters from an unarmed American supply ship. The review's language was restrained, as official military reviews tend to be. What it said, in summary, was this: the Rappahannock was put in a position it should not have been in, because a system that should have flagged the risk did not flag it, and the people who noticed the risk did not have a pathway to act on what they noticed. The authorization process was revised within 60 days. It had not been revised for 11 years prior. The 3 Iranian boghammers that had circled the Rappahannock were identified through their hull numbers, visible on overhead imagery taken during the incident, as craft based at the Farsi Island facility. The crews were not identified. The commanding officers of the boats were not publicly named. Iran's official position, transmitted through diplomatic channels, was that IRGCN vessels had been conducting routine patrol operations in the northern Gulf and had approached the American supply vessel to verify its identity and transit authorization before departing normally. Verify its identity, the round at 44 meters was not mentioned. The United States' formal diplomatic response delivered through the Swiss Embassy channel described the incident as unprovoked harassment of a non-combatant U.S. Navy vessel and warned of appropriate defensive measures in future incidents. 3 Gulf Cooperation Council states communicated privately that they had tracked the 3 boghammer contacts from their departure from Farsi Island and that the contacts had been moving on a direct intercept course with the Rappahannock from the moment they launched. Not a coincidental patrol, not a verification of identity, but a pre-planned intercept that left Farsi Island knowing the supply ship was in transit and unescorted. Knowing the Rappahannock's transit schedule was not a secret. It had been filed in the standard logistics coordination message that moves through the Gulf region's naval communications network. The Iranian intelligence capability to monitor that network had been assessed as capable of partial access in the current threat assessment. Partial access was sufficient to know a 677-foot oiler carrying 160,000 barrels of fuel was transiting unescorted at 7:04 a.m. The review considered that possibility. It did not reach a definitive conclusion, but it recommended that future transit schedules for unarmed supply vessels be handled under tighter communication security protocols. The recommendation was implemented. It had not been in place that morning. USNS Rappahannock returned to operational service the day after the incident. Commander Wells filed her report with Fifth Fleet and received a formal commendation for her handling of the situation, specifically for maintaining communications discipline, avoiding escalation, and feeding real-time contact data to Fifth Fleet throughout the incident. The commendation was merited. What it could not address was the larger question that the incident posed about the vulnerability of American logistics vessels operating in a contested environment without organic defensive capability. A carrier strike group is built around offensive and defensive power. The carrier, the cruisers, the destroyers. All of it is armed, trained, and prepared for exactly the kind of threat environment the Persian Gulf represents. The supply ship that keeps all of it operational is a 677-foot vessel with a single .50 caliber gun. The IRGCN knows this. In any serious escalation scenario in the Persian Gulf, the American supply chain, the oilers, the combat stores ships, the ammunition ships, becomes an immediate target. Not because they are warships, because they are the reason the warships can keep fighting. Cut the supply line and the carrier strikes group burns through its fuel reserves in 11 days. The 3 bog hammers that circled the Rappahannock at 20 knots for 6 minutes had not fired again after the initial warning shot. They had demonstrated capability, collected intelligence on the response time, and departed before the F/A-18Fs could do anything other than fly over them at 500 knots. 14 minutes, that was the response time. The IRGCN now knew the response time. The next intercept of an American supply vessel, if it comes, will be planned around 14 minutes. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.